So let's talk about showing up today. It is Women's History Month. And this week's podcast drops tomorrow. The new episode drops tomorrow. And by the way, I am 33 downloads away from 5,000. So thank you for all of you guys who support and download and listen and show up. I am beyond humbled for all of the support that I get from all of you guys. Thank you. So be sure you listen to that. It's going to be Tiffany Williams, who's the CEO of Twice Media Productions here in Houston. She's got an incredible story. And my conversation with her, as well as some things that happened last week, is really what drove me today about showing up, and especially as women, and in particular women of color, how we show up and when we show up and where we show up. So my post on Monday was, you are your best bet. And that came up because I've been talking to a lot of people, and then myself had been going through a lot of contemplation, a lot of deep thinking, a lot of time spent kind of resting and rejuvenating and trying to figure out what was going on, because I tend to be fairly high energy. And so when my energy is low for long periods of time, something's not right. And I don't have any trouble going to a doctor and saying something's not right. We've got to figure out what this is. But there was something different. It was more, when your spirit is tired versus when your body is tired, right? And so that was happening. We had the whole issue with the Meghan Markle interview and the things that happened there. And then we had the Sharon Osbourne and Cheryl Underwood situation and the fallout that came from that. And it got me to thinking a lot about, cancellation versus consequences. And clearly there are people who absolutely need to be canceled. They do. Their behavior is so egregious, they absolutely need to be canceled. But when you cancel people immediately, what you lose, and I said this in my podcast a couple weeks ago, and in my postings, what you lose is the connection to consequences. So if we immediately say, you just got to go, then people don't necessarily see the impact of their behavior and suffer the consequences and then have the opportunity to change behavior. So if you think about that, we think about the issues of racism, which do still exist. People don't think they do. And then I saw some posting the other day about reverse racism, which doesn't exist. It all comes down to how we're going to show up and what we're going to do with the information we get and the energy that we have. So many of you know I'm a huge believer in therapy. Communities of color, I need us to get over ourselves. And if you need help, you need to go get help. You need to ask for help. If you see something, say something. If you see somebody who needs some help, do your best to get them some help. And so I've had a therapist for a very long time, thank God. And so we've been talking a lot about this whole energy thing, because I'll go in and say, I don't know what my energy is. There's something wrong with my energy. I am high energy. I like being in the zone, but I can't seem to really stay in the zone and all that kind of stuff, right? And then you go through this whole spiral of, why can I stay in the zone? I need to be in the zone. How about just mess, right? Head trash. So she brought something up to me, and I need you guys to hang with me. So all you folks on Jerry's page too, all my standard listeners, New York, St. Louis, all you folks, love you, so glad you're here. And all my folks on my Facebook page, probably Odessa, Houston, love y'all. I can't see you right now because I'm on StreamYard, but I'm assuming you're there. I want y'all to hang with me. So one of the things we started talking about is, we've all heard fight, flight, or freeze, right? We've heard those things where when you feel threatened or don't feel safe, your body goes into this fight, or your mind goes into this fight, flight, or freeze. What she started talking about is this thing called the polyvagal theory. Polyvagal theory, P-O-L-Y-V as in Victor, A-G-A-L, polyvagal theory. And it moves from this whole level of kind of social engagement or sympathetic, right? It's called ventral vagal, right? So sympathetic. And then it moves into, or ventral vagal is where it starts. Then it moves into sympathetic, and then it moves into dorsal vagal. And so that ventral vagal is when you're in that zone, right? You got it. Things are rocking. Things are rolling. You got joy. You're happy. You're engaged. You are on your game. You are in your zone of genius. That's that ventral vagal. But then something happens, and you either get angry, or you get upset, or you get afraid, all of those things, and then you're automatically in flight or fight mode. That's when you're sympathetic, right? Something external has said, I got to be careful. I'm in danger, right? Something's not right. I'm in danger. And then the next thing is it has just been so much that you just shut down. That's that dorsal vagal, right? When you kind of get dormant, you're just tired, you're exhausted. Maybe there's shame, hopelessness. What am I going to do? I just don't understand, all that kind of stuff. And so all of us go through all of those situations at any one period of time where we're really in the zone, or we're just really angry or frustrated, or we just shut down. And what was interesting is when you're feeling these things, especially if you're in a corporate situation, because I'm telling you guys, corporate trauma is real. It's real. I have such a heart right now for all of my HR colleagues, because y'all have been going through it through this pandemic. How we're going to treat people, how we're going to reward people, how we're going to bring people back, how we're not. Are we going to test? Are we not going to test? Are we going to require vaccines? Are we not? What about the legal ramifications? What about accommodate? I mean, y'all have been going through it. And it's one of the reasons I'm like, oh, I'm so glad I'm not doing that anymore. But I'm feeling for you guys, and I'm pulling for you, because I know it's a lot with very little thanks. And so we all move through these periods and these feelings kind of constantly, right? As my therapist talks about, it's kind of like a ladder, right? At the very top is this ventral vagal, this, yeah, I'm in the zone. And in the middle is kind of this fight or flight. And then at the end is this freeze, this dorsal at the bottom. What I didn't realize is that response is a nervous system response. So when we talk about here at the Rutledge perspective that words matter, we often say, and I've said too, you can't control necessarily what happens to you, but you can control your response to what happens to you. And that is true at some level. That's what I've learned, right? That is true at some level. Lifelong learner, right? We learn, when you know better, you do better. So on the one hand, when something happens, when we're in a situation with someone who mistreats us, when we're in a corporate situation and we feel like we're subjected to microaggression, when we are in a personal situation and feel like the person isn't hearing us, whatever the situation is, we begin to respond. Those things are nervous system responses. Like our system responds to whether we're feeling like we're threatened, if we don't feel safe, if we feel like we've got to protect ourselves. There is an actual nervous system response to that we can't control. It just happens. What we can control is understanding what is happening, acknowledging that, and then deciding how we're going to respond to it. So it's an awareness that we are in control of, not necessarily the nervous system response. I was just fascinated by this. Now I know I'm a bit of a nerd, but it was just fascinating to me, this whole polyvagal thing. But what it also said to me was, especially women, we tend to beat ourselves up when we start feeling some type of way in situations. How come I wasn't stronger? Oh man, I ended up crying at work. I didn't feel good about that. Or external people tell us you were too emotional, or Black women, you were aggressive, right? Mad Black woman syndrome. And we start to feel like we have failed or something is wrong with us because of our response. And some of that response is just innate as beings, as human beings. It's what our nervous system does. And then if we can be aware of that, then we can decide what we want to do. And that's where the other things that I've been talking about before around code switching, right? And how you show up and what you do, those become real and those become habit. So I mentioned earlier about this whole thing around Cheryl Underwood and Sharon Osbourne. And I admit that I only watched the short clip because I just couldn't watch the whole thing. And essentially, there was a conversation around the Meghan Markle, Prince Harry interview, and Piers Morgan's response to that, and Sharon Osbourne's support of Piers Morgan. That ended up being this whole conversation about racism and who's a racist and all this kind of stuff. When you watched the exchange, Sharon Osbourne was yelling. Her voice was raised. She was crying. All of these kind of things. She was so upset because she felt she was being attacked. She felt she was being called a racist. She lost it, as they say. If you watch Cheryl Underwood, she remained calm. She looked her in her eye. She talked to her in a voice that was probably much less strident. It was much less strident than she could have been. And one of the things that caught me that was an impetus for this conversation is Sharon Osbourne at one point looked at Cheryl Underwood and said, "You don't get to cry. I'm the one that's crying because I'm the one that's being attacked." Y'all, that's when I turned it off.
Okay, watch that.
Because here's the reason. And here's the bigger issue. So this isn't necessarily about Sharon Osbourne and Cheryl Underwood. Here's the bigger issue when it comes to women, and in particular women of color, and how we show up and this whole response to our environment. Women, number one, have been expected to remain calm, to be docile, or it is seen as stereotypical if you get emotional. People just write you out. Well, they're just emotional. They can't take it. They're not strong enough to be in this position. All that stuff you've heard. Okay. But what you saw in that exchange was a perfect example of code switching. A perfect example of, let me make sure that I manage my behavior to such an extent that I do not escalate this conflict or hurt the other person's feelings or say something that I shouldn't say because this situation is so volatile right now. Now, one might argue, well, everybody does that. At some level, yes. But everybody doesn't do that all of the time. Can you imagine if Cheryl Underwood had responded to Sharon Osbourne with the same raised voice, the same tears, the same hand gestures, all of that kind of stuff? That would have been Cheryl Underwood attacks Sharon Osbourne. Cheryl Underwood loses it. Cheryl Underwood can't control her angle. Mad Black woman.
Mm-hmm.
And we had the same thing when you looked at if you go back and replay, again, this is not about the politics. If you go back and replay the debate between now Vice President Kamala Harris and former Vice President Mike Pence, and watch her facial expressions and watch how finally she said, "I'm speaking." And someone actually posted it, the mental gymnastics that women have to go through, and in particular women of color, in situations like that before we even open our mouths, is incredible. What's the situation? What did people say? How do I look? How do I sound? Am I managing the way my eyes are looking at people? What is my face saying? What are my hands saying? What is my body language saying? You go through all of that stuff. I mean, it's in nanoseconds, but it is very conscious and very front of mind because you have to try to focus on someone hearing your message as opposed to being and negating you because of the messenger. We've talked about that on the Rutledge perspective too. How sometimes the messenger negates the message, right? The package makes the message unable to be heard, which is just insane. But it's true. And so if you look at that exchange, and I think, Sharon Osbourne came back later on and said she panicked because there was a lot of fear, she was concerned, all of these kind of things in her apology. Cheryl Underwood came back and said, I figured there was something else going on. I was concerned for her. This is what Cheryl Underwood's position was at a very high level. And I suggest you kind of go back and watch this and look at it to see what I'm talking about. So on the one hand, in that apology about I panicked, I was afraid, what we know is that fear is often the underlying emotion for anger, right? I am afraid something's going to happen to me, and I respond in anger. It's that sympathetic area. Our nervous system is like fear, right? Danger, something's going to happen. I can be angry. I can run, right? It's fight or flight. And so, but underlying that is fear. I don't feel safe. And so now I have to have some kind of response that helps increase my safety, right? My blood pressure is rising. My insulin is rising. All of these kind of things are happening physically to our physical bodies and our nervous systems when we don't feel safe. And so in her apology, what you heard was she did not feel safe. What you heard from Laurel's perspective, because it's the Rutledge perspective, and Cheryl Underwood's response was more of a kind of freeze response, right? I'm just going to let this slide. I'm just going to shut it down. I'm going to dissociate, right? I feel kind of helpless in this situation because I can't respond the way I want to, because I got to tell you, there are a myriad of other responses she could have had that would have been not only valid, but were warranted. And she didn't. Kind of like Michelle Obama said, when they go low, we go high. But here's the challenge in that for women, and in particular for women of color. When people go low and we go high, we are consistently staying in that game of, wait a minute, I gotta figure out how to say this so the other person is comfortable. I gotta figure out how I'm gonna respond to this so the other person doesn't think differently of me. I gotta figure out how I'm gonna deal with this so the other person isn't upset. The other person doesn't make a judgment. I don't lose my job. I don't mess up my reputation. I don't. You're constantly in that area of not necessarily high levels of fight or flight, but you're definitely in an area of fight that says, I got to make sure that I protect myself on an ongoing basis, not only in this situation, but for the future in how I respond to this thing. And that, y'all, is exhausting. It's exhausting. Because here's the thing, and you'll hear it in Tiffany's interview. One of the things she says is, you got to be able to bet on you. And as she began to build her business, one of the things she said was, I knew that I was going to be okay. If the business worked, great. If I had to go get a job, great. But I knew I was going to be okay because I believed in me. And when you're in this constant fight or flight, when you're in this constant mode of having to justify and manage your behavior, and I'm not talking about just general manage your behavior for the appropriateness of the situation. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about deeper than that. I'm talking about deep where you are having to almost come out of who you are. We talked about that last week, right? Where it's more than imposter syndrome. This is code switching. This is deep. This is getting at fundamentally who you are in your personality and having to switch that up every time you show up and every time you engage, because it is somehow either not accepted, inappropriate, whatever, insert word here. And so that idea that you are in constant code switch makes it very difficult to be effective on an ongoing basis. That constant fight or flight eventually is going to get you to that kind of dorsal, right? That just give up, that freeze mode. And when I think about the decision I made to leave, when I decided to leave corporate, I had been in fight or flight for so many years, not months, years, that I was just done. I had been in dorsal. I had moved from the fight or flight to just dorsal. I was just done. And the thing I had to recognize, now I didn't know it was dorsal at the time, right? I didn't know it was in that freeze mode at the time. All I knew was I felt bad. And I wasn't able to show up the way I wanted to show up. I wasn't able to engage the way I like to engage. I wasn't able to have the energy and the desire and the positivity that I normally show up with. And so something had to change. And when you know the rules, then you know how to operate within the rules. And I knew that they would let me stay and let me get rid of me and lose me and do all kinds of stuff as long as I wanted to. I had to decide if I was okay with that. And I wasn't. So I left. Right? I resigned. I wasn't okay with continuing to lose me on a daily basis. I wasn't okay with continuing to not be able to show up in the strongest way, the most authentic way. Well, I kept being authentic and kept being honest, but having to manipulate myself and manage at such a deep level that by the time I left at the end of the day, I was so exhausted, I couldn't even think, much less have a conversation with anybody, much less be present for family and friends and people who I cared about. It just wasn't possible because there wasn't any energy left. You move into that freeze mode, right? Complete exhaustion, helplessness, fatigue at a soul level, a cellular level, right? So when we think about this Women's History Month and then the amazing things that women are doing, and the number of women that have been starting businesses, especially during the pandemic, but all along, and especially the number of women of color who've been starting businesses. And entrepreneurship is not easy, y'all, because there's not a better time to get in the middle of all your head trash than to be out on your own trying to make a business work. All that stuff that you've been burying shows up front and center Here I am. Guess what? You got to deal with me now because you can't put it aside, right? Because it's just you. And so all of that gets to be really, really exhausting. And when we are looking to how we lead, how we set up our organizations, how we build cultures, when we say we want people to show up as they are, we want people to bring their whole selves to work. That's that whole D&I language, right? The standard line. Diversity is key. Diversity builds more profitable companies. All of those things around diversity. We understand we got to do it because it's the right thing to do. But diversity is the easy part. I can go hire a bunch of people who think differently and look differently and act differently. I can live in different places. I can do all of that. But what am I doing once they get there? And it's evidence that inclusion is the harder piece, because look at the number of people and the amount of diversity that's in the upper echelons of business. There's a reason why so many women start their own businesses. There's a reason why so many people of color start their own businesses. There's a reason why people get tired and why people move in kind of those middle ranges, right? There's a reason why there are so many women of childbearing years who have children who end up either staying in lower level jobs or not pushing for the promotion or getting out. There's a reason that people do that. And that's about inclusion. That's about valuing where people are. It doesn't mean you have to turn your company upside down, because there's some jobs that they're just the job. But companies that are really involved in inclusion and really adamant about inclusion will not just say that is the way it is. It just is. That job just is. As we've said, we can no longer with integrity say that working remotely is not possible and not effective. If nothing else, through this pandemic, we have learned that you can be highly effective and companies can be highly profitable when big portions of their workforce are working remotely. It's a possibility. Now, you can say you prefer for people to come back in the office, and that is fine. And there are a lot of people who really want to be back, and there is value in that connection. I'm not saying that it's not valuable. What I'm saying is words matter. And to say that it's not possible anymore is just not true. Again, you're entitled to your own opinion, you're not entitled to your own facts. So if you're really going to think about how people show up, and if you as a leader are going to show up, then how are you creating a culture that enables everybody on your team to also show up the best way possible and bring their whole selves to work? And again, I'm not talking about making sure you're managing behavior that's appropriate for the situation. Just like we talked about, it used to be when you would go to the theater, you dressed up. Now nobody dresses up for anything. But that used to be the thing. So you didn't wear jeans if you went to the ballet or you went to the opera. You just didn't do that. That wasn't done. Because the environment and the situation called for something different. It's like wearing jeans to an after 5 thing, right? So while we've gotten casual in a lot of things, there is such a thing as appropriate behavior, and there's a level of assimilation and conforming that needs to be done depending on the culture and the environment and what you're doing. That's all true. That's all true. And this is deeper than that. This is when people can't be who they are, because when they are dismissed. Their talent is dismissed, their opinion is dismissed, or they are actually dismissed from the organization. They are demoted. They suffer from microaggression. They are ostracized. All of those kind of things. If the culture tells someone that they are not valued, or they are not wanted, or they are not included, that leads to all of that other stuff internally. Ultimately, that fight or flight mode, and then eventually that freeze mode. And that's when people leave. That's when people leave. Actually, people will probably tend to leave more in that fight or flight. When they're in freeze mode, that's when you got the people who are, as we say it, retiring in place. That's when you are losing the most money and the most effectiveness and the most profit, arguably. It's when you've got talented people who have decided they are now just going to come and get that paycheck because you've told them through your actions that they're not valuable. You've told them that their perspective, their opinion, their talent, their intellect, their experience doesn't matter. And if you're telling them that, and they don't necessarily have any impetus to do something else, They will sit there and they'll do exactly what you told them to do, which is just conform. And what are you losing by creating a culture that says you can't show up and give your opinion and give your talent and give your experience? Because we don't value. We say we did when we hired you, but we don't really. Because people will listen to what you say. They will believe what you do. And if you say, we want you here, we want to include you, we want everybody to show up, we want everybody to think fast, we want to fail fast, we want to do things faster, we want to make sure that we are innovative, we're on the cutting edge. And the minute somebody fails, you fire them or you demote them or you remove them from the project. Your word said you want it, but your action said you didn't. People will believe your actions. They will listen to your words. They will believe your actions. And then they will understand whether or not you and your organization are operating in integrity. And if you've got an open organization, then hopefully that person comes to you and says, you know what? This is what you said, but when this happened, this is what you did. So I'm just confused. I just need to understand what was the expectation, because it is not unkind to be clear, whether you're setting expectations or you're getting clarity on expectations. It's not unkind to be clear, because you don't have to be nasty to be candid. That's not a requirement. You can be kind and be clear. Clarity is the important piece there. And when we are looking to how we show up as leaders, how we show up as women in leadership, women as individual contributors, women who are looking at other women who have made it, women who are looking at other women who've gotten out, women who are looking to women to be able to make it. How we are showing up, how we're behaving, how we're responding is informing someone else's, not only their opinion of us, but their decision around how they respond in the same situation. And they're watching not only your behavior, but the response to your behavior. And so people watching the exchange between Sharon and Cheryl saw two very different responses to the same event. Saw an immediate fight or flight response to a question. Saw then a calming and soft and cajoling and honoring and all of that in response to something that was really kind of violent is not the right word, but really passionate. And there was a lot of story in that. There was a lot of telling in how that interaction happened. Because one of those people was able to be in their feelings, and one of those people was not. Let me rephrase that. One of those people was in their feelings. One of those people was not. Both of those people made a choice as to how they were going to respond. One probably didn't go through a whole process based on the apology, didn't think about how that would be received. The other was very clear. And you could see it in her face. You could see the mental gymnastics going on. If you really pay attention, listening actively is not only listening to what people say, but it's listening to how they say it. It's watching body language. It's watching eye movement. It's watching hand movements. It's hearing what people say and what they don't say. That's what active listening is. And what you saw in that exchange is one person who was coming with complete freedom to show up however and wherever and whenever they want to, and one who was not. And as women, we are going through those mental gymnastics all the time. I talked last week about how, sometimes, especially women in very industrial organizations, put on this mantle of harshness, right? Hardcore, Teflon, tough as steel. I think they used to call, was it Margaret Thatcher that they named her the Iron Maiden, right? The prime minister in Britain. They called her the Iron Maiden, kind of this external, this core of steel, right? This Teflon skin, nothing can hurt you. And so we see a lot of women in these very industrial or political or hard charging environments show up and manifest their behavior as if nothing bothers them, as if they can take it all, as if there's no problem that they can't handle. And in many cases, all of those things are true. And there's also a portion of that probably very much gets under some of their skin, but they can't show that. And so if there's no outlet, if there's no confidant, if there is no mentor, if there is no sponsor, if there is no guide, if there is no village for these women who are not feeling like they can show up authentically, but are feeling like they have to put on this mantle of harshness or have to damp down who they are just to survive, that is not sustainable. And that's where organizations lose on amazing talent and contribution, and therefore innovation and profitability, because they've created an environment where you cannot come as your whole self. And again, that doesn't mean you can just act any kind of way and you can show up any kind of way. You can do all those kind of things. There are cultural norms in an organization. And the organizations, especially private companies, they have every right to set the culture the way they want it. What I am asking you as leaders is to examine the culture that you've created, and is it the one you really meant? Is the culture that you've created the one that you've decided you want to have? Or is it not? And how do you know? Are you seeking feedback? Are you listening actively? Are you paying attention to behavior? Are you seeing someone's behavior change or morph? Are you seeing people who normally have a lot of contribution all of a sudden getting quiet? Are you paying attention to people beyond you? And remember, leadership may be a position, but leadership is about behavior. You can be leading a company, but you can be leading a department. You can be leading a team, but you could also be leading a project. You could be leading a committee, or you could just be leading because you are a person of influence. Leadership is not just about position. Leadership is about behavior. And so as leaders, what are we doing to create an environment in which everyone is able to show up as themselves and not have to be in this constant code switching? To surely understand that there are consequences to the choices we make. We are free to make the choices we want to make. We are not free from the consequences of those choices, which is the problem with cancellation culture. People need to understand consequences. That's how we learn. Kids learn not to touch the hot stove because they got burned, right? They learn not to slide on the floor in their stocking feet because they fell. They learn not to run up and down the stairs because they broke out some teeth or broke an arm, right? Or to climb the tree because they broke an arm. We learn through consequences, through pain, through all those kind of things, good and bad, right? That's how we learn. So when we cancel consequences, we cancel the opportunity to learn and to change behavior. Because the thing about an apology, the big thing about apology is not the apology itself, it's the changed behavior after the apology. Because you can say, I'm sorry, or I apologize all day long. But if your behavior stays the same, that tells me what you really meant. Because again, people listen to what you say, they believe what you do. And as women, if we are constantly seeing that we have to change and morph and be something that we aren't, just so that other people are comfortable, we learn that we are not appropriate. We learn that we are not enough. We learn that we can't be who we are in whatever environment. And because we're beings, then we morph ourselves into that if that's a place we want to stay. And sometimes, as I said, you get those people who just kind of rest in place. Because sometimes it's easier to just stay with the enemy you know than to make a change. Because making a change is hard. Change is not easy. And the only thing constant is change. All those little, cliches we get. Change is hard. And if you can acknowledge what you're feeling, understanding that some of it is truly this nervous system response, right? This physical response that we don't have any control over. But if you can become aware of that, then you can make a conscious decision around the response that you have. And sometimes you may choose to take it down a notch, right? Some of that is conflict management. If somebody's yelling and screaming up here, you come in down here, right? That's kind of conflict management. If you think about kids, right? When your parents were yelling and screaming, you could tune that out. When they got real quiet and you had the strain, that's when you knew it was serious. Or when they called you your whole name, right? That's when you knew it was serious. But when people are noisy all the time and they're in noise all the time, the noise just becomes noise. It's hard to get a message through the noise. And when people become quiet, that's when we have to strain to listen. We have to pay attention. And so when you're looking at those pieces and you're looking at how you're leading, what are you doing? Are you causing people to just dismiss you because you're so loud all the time? Are you able to manage conflict and manage relationships because you are able to manage your behavior in a way that is appropriate? Or are you negating your perspective? Are you not giving your opinion? Are you not enabling yourself to be authentically who you are, because the pain that you experience when you do that tells you that it's not worth it? And only you can answer that question. And as leaders, we have to pay attention to that. We have to pay attention to the environment that we are creating, because that's how we build team. That's how we build success. That's how we build profit. When people can come in wholly, completely, as their entire selves, that's when we get the best. That's when we know that we have the opportunity to really have people understand and listen. And we are taking advantage of all they have to offer. And sometimes we have a hard time doing that, because it requires us to pause and to pay attention and to get out of ego. And it's hard to get out of ego sometimes. But leadership is not about you. Leadership is about other people. Leading is helping other people be successful, because through their success, you're successful too. Right? Leadership is getting things done through other people. As you move up in an organization, it becomes less and less about what you know and more about how you lead. Your what becomes less and less important. Your how becomes more and more important. And how are you leading people? How are you encouraging people to bring their whole selves to work? How are you helping people be the best that they can be? And in particular, in this Women's History Month, how are you encouraging the women around you to be vocal, to be focused, to be engaged, to showcase their talent and their experience, as opposed to put it away? How are you as a leader ensuring that you are including everyone in your organization and paying attention to your own unconscious bias? Because we all got it. We all got some kind of bias. How are you paying attention to the bias that you may be showing, so that you're able to respond in a way that, one, acknowledges your own bias? As I had a CEO say a long time ago, if I did wrong, I will apologize and I will make it right. That's about change behavior. He also said, if not, I'll see you in court, right? But it's about that change behavior. It's about honoring people authentically because of what they bring. Even if in your mind you're like, I don't get it, I'm not sure, I don't know that that's going to work. If your behavior says all of that too, and you don't even give people a chance, why would they continue to give you information? And here's the danger in that as a leader. If your behavior constantly tells people that their opinion isn't valued, their talent isn't valued, their perspective isn't valued, not only might you be losing out on talent, but there may be some critical information to something that you want to achieve that you are missing, that is critical to the success of what you're trying to achieve. At worst case, there could be some critical information that you need to know to prevent failure. And because you have not honored the people who are working for you or who are looking to you for guidance, because you've not honored them, at worst case, you've got somebody who is just willing to let you fall and sabotage you, because you have created an environment where they're not valued. So why would they help? You don't value them. Why would they value you? You don't care about their success. Why would they care about yours? It's a valid question. And something as leaders that we need to think about when we're talking about showing up, and how we show up, and why we show up, and when we show up. And women, when we're showing up in a place, understanding how we show up and why we show up and when we show up and if we show up. Because ultimately, all of that comes down to who we want to be and how we want to serve. And by bringing all of us into the place, we can serve our best. But it takes a minute to get there sometimes. And find your village. Find those people around you. Because I am telling you, my last organization, there were some people that I relied on so heavily in terms of just being able to get my mind right and get my spirit right. And especially for those of you in HR, that's really hard to find, because there's so much stuff you know that you just can't talk to people about, right? Because what you know could really hurt people or could damage the organization. So you can't just talk to everybody. You can't have a confidant everywhere. You just can't. It's not possible. But you got to find those people who can lift you up, who can support you, who can, when you're in that dorsal phase and you just want to go to bed, who know when it's time to just bring the ice cream and watch Netflix with you, and when it's time to say, okay, let's move to fight. How can we fight this, right? We ran away, we went to ground, we honored that, we rested, we rejuvenated, we got ourselves back together. Now it's time, because it's important. You've told me, as someone who cares about you, that this is important to you, so I'm going to honor that you've got to regroup. But then I'm also going to honor what you told me you wanted, and I'm going to help you get back to where you need to be. And as women, if we can support each other in that process, it is critical, because it is not easy. It's not easy. And there's so many external things happening, and there's so many mixed messages about how we should show up and when we should show up, that you need those people around you who are going to tell you the truth. We talked about that with mentors. Mentors are not your best friends. Mentors are people who will tell you the truth. You want folks in your village who are also going to tell you the truth, who are going to support you and cry with you and get in the boat with you sometimes and just say, yeah, I'm with you. But they're also going to know it. No, I can't agree with that. No, you were wrong. Yep, that didn't go too well. Ooh, have you thought about this? You need people who are going to be truth tellers for you. Because sometimes we are so caught up in our own pain and our own drama that we can't see a way out. And that's also why you need your village, because if you get so bad there and you can't call for help, you need someone in your village that you know is going to do that. Because you are not required to sit in overwhelm. You are not required to sit in pain. I don't care what anybody tells you. You are not required to be in pain. You're just not. You're just not. And companies are there for a product and customers and profit. Let's just be real. There are some companies who also have a philanthropic arm, who have products that are environmentally sound, whose leaders have a heart for what they do and the people that work for them. There are companies out there that exist. But as I read a few weeks ago, there was a change in time, probably 20 years ago, from a focus on stakeholders to a focus on shareholders. And if you go back and study that change and the change in that language, because words matter, that also aligned with a focus away from people and on to profit. And when the profit is on shareholder value and not stakeholder value, we forget the value of employees and the importance of employees and the importance of colleagues and the importance of a village. We forget that because our focus is on profit and shareholder return, not on stakeholder return. And stakeholder return is all encompassing. It's our environment, it's our culture, it's opportunity, it's innovation, it's support, it is constructive feedback, it is clarity, it's all of that stuff. Oh, and by the way, if we do that well, we will probably be really profitable. Just saying. So something to think about. Something to think about. I think we got about 8 minutes left. Okay, since I'm doing something new, I can't see anybody. And I'm going to work on that, because I don't know if there's something different I can do that will show me who you are and where you are. And so, forgive me. This
Can I
StreamYard
take
thing
some
is there.
questions from
Yes,
Facebook?
please.
Kathy Williamson says, I thank God that we have a great leader who is a woman that also demonstrates unity on the job. We celebrate Cultural Day, and so that we can learn the difference about each other. Mm-hmm. That keeps us as a group of employees to understand each other as a family type of employees. It also helps the students to interact with each other better.
Love that. Exactly. It's about appreciation, right? It's about appreciation. And I heard somebody, so I'm a lover of languages, right? And so I'm determined to get my Spanish and French back. But I read a post the other day that said, language is not about the words, language is about the culture. Because there's a culture that comes along with language. And we even talked about that last week, this code switching. When you think about code switching, the first definitions are about language. People switch back and forth between languages. And how that mindset shift, happens. But how we have to be careful that by cultural appreciation, we don't have unintended consequences of a lack of expectation for excellence and achievement, right? So you can honor the fact that people use colloquialisms, but that doesn't mean you prevent or expect less of them in terms of excellence and achievement by not encouraging them to be able to understand, what's the book say, English as she is spoke. There's a book that was written like that, right? So, or Spanish or German or whatever, right? There's a way that is that we communicate and that we interact that's really important, that supports excellence and achievement, that we should still demand from all students of all cultural backgrounds and from ourselves. But that doesn't mean we can't appreciate the cultural differences and honor those.
Media Marie Cole says she's reiterating what you said: honor people authentically for what they bring.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. Because you don't know what you're losing, y'all. When you don't allow people to be who they are and to come as they are, you don't know what you're losing. And again, that doesn't mean that there aren't things that are culturally appropriate for a certain environment. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is when people have to turn themselves into pretzels just to be seen. That is what we got to prevent. That is what we've got to prevent. Because I was just having this conversation with somebody yesterday. Sometimes you got to do what you got to do until you can do what you want to do. So if you are in an environment that is very conservative and buttoned up, and you come in with pink in your hair, right, and twists and all that kind of stuff, you do you, but understand what that means in terms of how you could fit in or be seen or be heard or be accepted or be valued in an organization that is extremely conservative. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying it is, and we have to be aware so that we can decide how we want to show up and understand that that is a choice, and we are free to make those choices, but we are not free from the consequences of our choices.
Go back to what you talked about at the beginning of the show about the different moods.
Oh, yes. So it's called the Polyvagal theory.
Mm-hmm.
Polyvagal. And again, I was just fascinated. So what it is if you picture kind of a ladder, at the bottom of the ladder is dorsal. So basically, if you think about dormant, like sleeping, right? That is when you're in that mode where the way I picture it is all you want to do is sleep. You're just tired. You don't have any energy. You may be really depressed. You may be feeling hopeless. You're just shutting down. That's dorsal. The next one is called sympathetic. And I got my little notes here. This is you can look this up too. I'm gonna show you. You can look this up. Polyvagal. Right. Polyvagal. And so the middle is sympathetic, and that's your fight or flight. That's when you don't feel safe and you got to respond. So that could be fear, it could be anger, it could be irritation, it could be worry, but you still have enough energy that you're going to do something. You're going to respond, fight or flight, right? The dorsal is the freeze, right? I'm frozen. I can't do anything. And then at the top is that it's called ventral vagal. That's that social engagement. That's when you're joyful. You're I call it in the zone. You are on it. You're engaged, you're happy, you are curious, you're open, you're compassionate. That's when you are your best self at the top. That's your ventral vagal. And so we all move through all of those things all the time. What I didn't realize, which really gave me, and I hope it does for you guys too, and maybe it's just because I'm a nerd. What I loved about that was there is the understanding and the realization that there's actually not just that kind of mental and emotional response, there's an actual physical response to these things that all center around safety and fear, right? Fight, flight, or freeze. Fight, flight, or freeze. And that's because we are beings, and as evolution happened, right, we have to respond to things that are danger, Will Robinson, right? And so that's what that polyvagal is. And that really, my understanding that there is an immediate response that is nervous that I can't control, then I can control my awareness. I can honor where I am in the ladder, and then I can help myself find tools to move whichever way I need to move. So polyvagal theory.
Can you weave in between those theories?
We do all the time.
Yeah.
We do all the time, consciously and unconsciously. We move through those all the time because it's all situational, right? And then we just respond. You just
It's
respond.
like I got this opportunity that came up. I got to do something this month, next in May, and I was all hype at first, and now I'm feeling. What's the word you just used? Now I'm feeling tired.
Yes. Yeah.
So what is that?
Like
What
that
cause that?
overwhelming
Like
kind
I got
of
work to do, but now I'm tired.
And some of that is there's something in there, at least the way I understand it. And guys, I am not an expert in polyvagal. I'm not.
Come on, Polly.
Right? I am not, and I'm not claiming to be an expert. It's just fascinating me. But some of that, if you start feeling some of that, again, that whole idea of you responding to an external stimulus.
Mm-hmm.
So there's probably something in that that you're unsure of. I wouldn't say necessarily fearful of, but that you're unsure of that's going to cause some work. That because you can't necessarily consciously identify it, somewhere subconsciously you're identifying it, and that's giving you that freeze response.
I think it's because we've been in pandemic mode.
That too.
And there's another beast that comes out after pandemic, mass production mode.
Yeah.
And you've been stuck in pandemic mode, and now you gotta.
Now what? Yeah.
And then
now
you gotta
what?
bring some components back in.
Right.
That you had distanced from for a while.
Well, and here's the thing. Again, knowledge is power. Being able to recognize and be aware of these things so that you can decide how you want to respond, that's the power in that. So, yes, what you just said, Jerry, we're coming out of, hopefully, please, Jesus, coming out of pandemic mode. But that desire or need or thought that we have to automatically turn it all back on immediately, that's not truth.
That's good.
That's not truth. We do not have to turn everything back on immediately. And in fact, I keep seeing this post that say, everybody says we can't wait to get back to normal. We can't wait to get back to normal. How about we go back and evaluate what normal was,
right,
and take the stuff that was good and leave the stuff that was bad? That's a good point. That's a really good point, right? So you don't have to immediately turn the faucet back on again, because, and the Texas folks will appreciate this, because after being frozen for so long, if you turn the pipe back on, you get busts.
Go, missionary.
Did I say that, Jerry?
You said that,
did I say that? Okay. So I'm just saying, if you use that as an example, if you automatically just turn everything back on, you never know where you're going to find a leak.
That's good, Laura. Say that one more time.
I'm saying, I'm not good. I'm kind of proud of me. What I said was, for those, Jerry mentioned, we're coming out of this pandemic, and then now it's time to turn it back on.
Yeah.
And I said, no, you don't have to turn everything back on. In fact, if you think about our freeze in Texas, right? When you're in freeze mode, everything freezes up. And then when you turn that water back on, if you haven't paid attention, you get all these leaks. Because your pipes have burst. Because now all of a sudden you're trying to push so much stuff.
Yeah.
Right? There's been so much stuff that's built up that when you turn it back on, the pipes can't handle it. It's the same thing. As we come out of this pandemic, let's not try to just automatically turn everything back on. How about let's take a little time? Let's slowly turn the faucet back on.
Yeah, that's good.
Slow drip. And then decide what we're turning back on and what we're leaving off. What are you closing off and what are you renewing? What are you adding and what are you burying? Because you have a choice.
Annette, we're all waiting to get safe. She said that she's in New York. I'll be glad when we get safe, because nothing has changed here in Houston that we know of. We're still wearing the mask and still social distancing and all of that. I think the hope is the vaccine, that many are taking the vaccine. And then that President Biden said something maybe around May. Right. Everybody can start taking it. And in July, we can probably do backyard barbecues. So I think that's the process of your mind thinking. Right. We're heading towards somewhere now.
Baby steps.
Baby steps.
Baby steps. And, and the CDC is even saying if you're vaccinated, you can hang around with other folks who are vaccinated.
Yeah.
And we're still being careful. I'm excited to get my second dose on Thursday. I'll let y'all know next week how that went. Second dose on Thursday because, I want to be able to hang around with my mom and know that I'm safe, and hang around with some other people and know that I'm safe. So that's why I do that. And for other people, not necessarily for me, because those of you who have been listening to me know I got an issue with needles. I just do. So my whole issue with the vaccine, yes, I had some concerns about the vaccine. We just, on this show, we tell the truth. I had some concerns about the vaccine and the speed because of the history of communities of color. But I did my research. And then once I got over that, then I had an issue with the needle. Because
But do you think that after you've taken that shot and you're somewhat vaccinated now, because I get to go tomorrow and I'm happy about that. I won't be here tomorrow. But would you think that now that you're going to take the second shot and then wait a couple of weeks, do you feel like that gives you some hope for going forward?
It does give me some hope, but folks still haven't been careful.
Yeah.
Not everybody has been paying attention. There are still people who don't take it seriously. I heard on the news today, somebody down in Miami, where you're seeing all those big parties, is like, yeah, I was afraid at first, but I was around people a couple of times and nothing ever happened to me. So now I'm not afraid. So I'm just out. I'm like, ooh, because it's not about you. It's not about you. You may have been okay, but what about the other people that you were in contact with?
Right.
They may not have been okay. So, not everybody's been careful. Not everybody's been cautious. So I am still going to exercise some caution for a while, right? Just because I got people around me who are connected to me who I am very concerned about and I love dearly, and I don't want anything to happen to them. So I'm going to continue to be careful for a while until we truly get to a position where there's so many people, because we are really low in percentage here in Texas of vaccinated people.
Yeah.
So as we get higher, then I will potentially. Thanks, Mom. Oh, I can see my mom on here. Sorry, y'all. We do that on the Mother's Perspective. Doesn't take much to make me excited. Okay. Any other questions?
Exercise, she says, yes, exercise caution. But when that goes back to that adrenaline, does it kind of give you an adrenaline? Because like you just blurted out, hey, Mom.
Yep.
So that you're going to be able to be around your mom without your mask on, feel a little safer.
Yes. Yeah, feel a little safer. And she's been careful. She's vaccinated, right? I'll be vaccinated. That's going to make it it's just going to feel, at least for the two of us, right? We'll feel like we can have that time together that's a little less, we're a little less concerned.
Was that slow drip you were just talking about?
Exactly. That's
you're taking babysit.
But I got other people that I may see that, have not had the opportunity to be fully vaccinated or what have you. We haven't been hanging out a lot, that we may still be cautious, right? Mm-hmm. Because that's just what we do with people we care about. So thank you guys for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody that was on the KCOH Facebook page and Jerry Beasley's page. Thank you for the people that were on my page. I'm sorry I couldn't see all of you guys. Get on StreamYard next time so I can see you. I'll be here every Tuesday, 10 to 11. Thank you, LinkedIn, for letting me post again. Hopefully some of my LinkedIn folks were able to see it. And we will be back next week, 10 to 11 Central. Take care. Bye.